Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Total Attorneys Power Chat, Real Networking in a Virtual World. Our hosts today are Nancy Myrland and Pam Gracyalny. Nancy Myrland is a social media professional, marketing, and advisor. Pam Gracyalny is General Counsel for Total Attorneys. Nancy has a tremendous amount of experience both inside law firms and then acting as a consultant for law firms all over the country. Nancy, can you tell us a little bit about your experience leading up to today? And Pam, will hand it off to you after that.
Sure. Hi, Chelsea. Hi, Pam. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. I'm thrilled to be doing this with you. Yes, I spent a lot of time in what one might call corporate America. Spent about 10 years at Time Warner in a consumer-based marketing environment, and then found my way to legal marketing in 1997 when I was in-house as a director of marketing for the Indiana-based law firm of Baker & Daniel, and then went out on my own and started Myrland Marketing in 2002. And so I'm in my 9th year of helping law firms figure out how to grow, mainly by helping them strengthen their relationships with their clients so that ultimately they become more profitable, and have been dealing with then professional services marketing ever since I joined Baker & Daniels. And then in the last 2 years have immersed myself in the use and learning and study of social media. Became certified in it last year and continue to try to learn as much as I can because there is so much. So it's a joy for me to be able to help clients incorporate these tools into their what were historically their traditional marketing plans.
Thank you. And Pam, you have quite a diverse background before Total Attorneys as well.
That's correct, Chelsea. Good morning, everybody. Yes, by way of background, I've practiced law for 19 years, and of those 7 years, I was a prosecuting attorney with the Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission here in Chicago. So my work involved investigating and bringing to hearing and to appeals at that time charges of misconduct against attorneys in the state of Illinois. So where there were allegations made that the rules of professional conduct had been violated, it was my job to investigate and prosecute those where it was appropriate. And after doing that, I went to a law firm and spent a few years on the defense side of things and enjoyed that quite a bit. And then was brought in-house by my primary client, and that began my corporate counsel experience, and that was about 10 years ago. So since then, I've been involved as general counsel for a couple of companies, and coming here to Total Attorneys has been pretty unique and special for me because given my background and given what we do here with focusing on advertising and marketing for law firms and attorneys and outsourcing and doing support type services for law firms, I'm able really here to marry the ethics portion of my background with the general counsel portion of my experience. So it gives me the unique opportunity to, as I like to say, use all of my parts. So I'm happy to be here with Nancy today, and we'll be pointing out ethical considerations as we walk through the social media and marketing aspects as they relate specifically to those in the legal profession.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm very excited about today's topic, and I think we'll have a lot of interesting questions and areas that we'll cover today. Quick housekeeping notes before we get started. If you have questions during today's session, you can use the GoToWebinar tool on the right-hand side of your screen to enter them in, and I'll see them. We'll bring them up at the end of the session for answers. You can also email your questions to powerchat@totalattorneys.com, and if you're having technical issues during the session, you can email powerchathelp@totalattorneys.com, and someone on our side will help you. So we're going to get started today with the 4 stages of social media. And Nancy, do you kind of want to go through these with us, kicking us off for this morning?
Absolutely. And Chelsea may have said this, but if anyone's on Twitter and wants to tweet about this, the hashtag is PowerChat, correct?
Correct. Hashtag PowerChat, and you can also Twitter @TotalAttorneys, and we'll be able to see those questions and comments.
Wonderful. Well, you know, this is a great topic for attorneys and legal marketers because historically when we've discussed networking and how we should or could be getting closer to clients and potential clients, we've thought of face-to-face interaction, and to many that meant getting to know someone either by telephone or a face-to-face meeting or some combination of those two. Then at some point we were all introduced to, or some born with, the Internet as another means by which we could talk to and with our target audiences. And it was a bit different because we weren't face-to-face, and there were some growing pains at that time even until people became comfortable. We had to make sure we were communicating the correct thoughts, the correct emotions, the concern for others, and quite frankly, our personality. And this virtual world that we're in and virtual networking is just the same. We're dealing with the same sorts of challenges, so it's a great topic to talk about. I think the good news is that even though we call this virtual networking or social networking or any other term anybody might be using, the networking that's taking place and what I'm observing taking place is still very real, with all of the benefits and actually a few more challenges than if we were with someone face-to-face. And yes, the 4 stages of social media, and I'll preface this by saying that these are just 4 stages that I came up with that deal primarily with the communication in social media. There may be 50 other lists of 4 or 5 stages, and they're probably all right. That's the one thing I've learned about social media, is that if there are 100 of us on this call or 500 or however many there might be, then there are that many different ways to approach social media, and none of them is wrong. Not one of them is wrong, and they're all probably right for us. So that much we know, that it's okay to model our own methods and our own stages. But the first stage that I recommend professionals go in with is to think about connection and getting started. And to connect, obviously you want to reserve your personal name in as many spaces as you can. If you can reserve it and not have to have underscores or clever names that'll be hard for people to remember, or monikers or logos, then that's really the preference. So reserve it now before somebody else does. Much as in the days of cyber squatting with our website URLs, we are seeing that, and we will continue to see it in social media spaces. So best to at least go get your names reserved now. Well, not right now. Maybe wait a little while till we're finished. But then make sure you have those, and make sure you have your name. And then build a good profile. You only have so many characters to describe yourself, so be direct and let people know what you do when they click on your profile. Again, give your real name so that people will know what to call you when they reply to you. Sometimes on Twitter, I will click on someone's name or the name they've used, and nowhere on their profile is their first name. And I tend to like to communicate with people using their name, so I do some poking around and I click through to a website and I end up in the bio section so that I can find a name. I don't know that everybody will have the time to do that, and sometimes I don't either. So to really make a true connection, try to put your name, your first name, somewhere and you're easily found in your profile so that anybody can talk to you if they want to. Then as part of this connection step, start looking for people that you want to learn from or teach or have fun talking to in many cases. Some you might want to have as clients, or you might want to hire them, depending on what your goals are. And you can do that in social media by conducting searches very much the way you do on Google by using specific search terms. And then for a while I suggest observing how all of these people that you are now friends and followers with, and see how they do it and how they talk in these social spaces and what sorts of behaviors they exhibit. And then you will soon figure out what you want to model and perhaps what you don't want to model, because you might not care for a certain style. And it really has to match, excuse me, it should match your own personality to begin with. To go into any of these spaces and try to make a connection when and invent a persona that doesn't naturally exist or doesn't necessarily mesh with who you are every day in every conversation is a really tough way to go. So just observe for a while. And then the next step is communication. And this is where social media, I think, yes.
Oh, I was just going to jump in if I can. It's probably better if I jump in here between the parts. As far as on the connection part and talking about reserving names, you made a nice parallel, I think, with URLs. And I just want to point out one thing that lawyers might want to be attentive to, and that is if you're going to choose a name that is different from your actual legal name, your given name, if you're going to use something creative and fictional, as your identifying name on social media sites, you may run into what we see with URLs on occasion, where if the URL name does something that lawyers can't do under the rules, it can become problematic. And I could see the same issues coming up with a chosen fictional name. So that, for example, if the name guaranteed that you, or suggested that the lawyer can produce certain results, that could be a problematic username on social sites. So just something to be aware of when you're selecting your name. If you do choose to be creative, do be mindful of the boundaries in the rules and apply the spirit of those rules then to your choice of a name.
Great. Thank you, Pam. Absolutely. And the next step that we're going to touch on is about communication. And as I mentioned, that's where I think it actually starts to become fun, because then we're connecting with people. And once you've watched for a bit, go ahead and jump in and say something. And you can do it in a variety of ways. Don't be too nervous. What I usually caution people is to, or my recommendation is, don't be too nervous about all of this. It really, if you happen to go to a business after hours, for example, and you meet someone, really is very much the same, although to some people it's easier because if they happen to be introverted and don't enjoy meeting people face-to-face, sometimes networking in these social spaces and these social sites is a little bit easier because they don't have to worry about being as nervous. So go ahead and jump in and comment on something someone has written or a conversation between others. And one of the unwritten rules of social media and social networking is that it is okay, and it's actually expected on mediums as public as Facebook and Twitter, for example, to jump in on a conversation and make a comment or a compliment or even say, have you thought about this? Or simply making periodic statements about what you're working on without revealing any specifics, obviously, that would harm client confidentiality or cause a conflict of interest. And then you can also ask someone their opinion on something. If you happen to notice that you have an expert, my friend Tim, who I think is on the line and is UMCLE on Twitter, I know that he knows more about CLE than anyone else I know. If I have a question about CLE and I see him on my Twitter stream, for example, or on Facebook, then I might reach out to him, and to establish a relationship, I might say, Tim, tell me what you know about XYZ, or how can we get involved in this CLE course in Indiana? What do I need to do to make it qualify? So these are all okay ways, good ways actually, to reach out to people. And the next step is education. And it's not only educating your followers, your friends, or your connections, but it's also being educated by those you follow. Part of the networking process, or part of what's wonderful about social media, is that there is so much to learn in these spaces. The other day, took somebody by surprise when I said that in the last 2 years, I honestly think that I have learned more about my discipline of marketing than I have in the last probably 8 years. And that's because I'm exposed to so much information from so many thought leaders that depending on how much time I have to study it and read it, I have been able to learn a great deal, for which I'm quite thankful. And you'll be amazed at how much you'll learn that you never knew before, or that even existed, and how much more you learn about topics with which you are already familiar. And it's these are some of the richest, most amazing growth tools that are available to us. So I would also encourage you to go in with education as an attitude. And then collaboration. And this is where all of your efforts begin to pay off. When you begin to develop relationships, much as in face-to-face relationships, you often develop close friendships with people in social media, believe it or not. And it's hard to understand until you actually get to that point. But I have close friends that I have never met face-to-face, whom I trust a great deal and I would go to for just about anything, that really are social media friends. you become comfortable enough at some point referring business, even though you've never met this person in real life. And others, hopefully, after having observed with you, networked with you, will feel comfortable sending you business. Now, this doesn't always happen, but it is a possibility, and it's something to keep in the back of your mind, to always be the person or the professional worthy of your friends and followers referring you business. Pam, I know before we move on to the next slide, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, Nancy, I think you've covered everything, and I think, no, nothing to add at this point.
Great.
Okay.
So let's move on to whom do I target, or how do I get started? Nancy, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I would think about these things first. I would think about your personality. Different personalities seem to take to different tools differently. Of what I call the big three, which are LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, LinkedIn appeals to just about everyone. It allows for business-like posting of information, but it also allows for networking through groups that you have the option of joining based on your interests and goals. And then Facebook, as most of you know, can be as social, quite frankly, as you want it to be. Many get involved with Facebook or got involved with Facebook in high school or college, but also many joined because someone in their family told them, and I hear this a lot, that if they wanted to see pictures of their grandchildren, they'd better hop on Facebook or they weren't going to see them, because that's where they're posting pictures. So however you got there, it really doesn't matter as much as what you do once you're there. And you have the option of blending personal with professional in both spaces, so you can make that choice. And then Twitter's a different animal for your personality. It's much more conversational than the other two, and it involves back and forth conversation with your followers if you really want to establish a connection and eventually a relationship. Sort of an unwritten rule of Twitter etiquette is that only when one has spent time on Twitter observing, conversing, and helping others do you really have the right to then begin to promote or to sell what you do. And we often see people that will jump onto Twitter and even in the other sites as well, and all they do is sell and they promote, and they don't engage in any conversation, and they make that very obvious. And they're not thought upon necessarily very highly when they do that. It becomes a little boorish, for example, as if someone walked up to you at a business meeting and just started to sell themselves before they even said hello or established a connection. I don't think you would respect that behavior very much. It's the same way. And then your interests dictate how you should get started. If you have hobbies or community or business interests or groups you're involved in, you can find those groups to network with in all three of these spaces, and you can conduct searches on them by keyword or people to find those things that appeal to your interests, both personal and business. And remember, it's okay to include personal interests in conversation as well as business interests, because what we're doing is really trying to help people get an idea of what we're like and what our personality is like. So meshing and blending personal interests is okay. But again, if you're not comfortable with that, then that's okay. This is your social media plan. You're the one that gets to decide. And then the last about getting started is your plan of action, or you might call it your marketing plan. And before you really spend a great deal of time in these spaces, the things that you need to think about, you need to have a plan of action and some expectations up front, which will help guide you. And the things I would help you with is that I would talk about who do you want to meet, and then what are your goals for this and next year, or even make it shorter, what are your goals for the next 3 months? Who are your target clients? What are the messages you want each of your audiences to hear? Who are your competitors, and what are they doing in social media? You want to think about who are your targeted referral sources. And then you want to think about the tone that you'll be using in each of these sites. Is it consistent with what you want your clients and referral sources to think of when they network with you in these spaces? Do you want to complain? Are you a serial complainer about things that are wrong in life? And do you enjoy sharing that? And trust me, a lot of people do that. And that's okay. If that's what people know you as, then so be it. I just wrote a blog post about that the other day. If that's who you are, then be that to the fullest. If that's not what you want your clients to know, then decide which part of your personality and what tone you should be using. And then you need to think about what success will look like by using each of these media. How will you measure it, and to whom will you go for a sanity check to make sure that your goals are realistic. And then the next slide is really talking about who do we target. And we touched on this a little bit in the last section under plan of action, the last point. So let's spend a little bit more time on it. There are 4 categories that we can talk about on this slide. And the first is friends. And certainly, obviously, we want to connect with our friends. That they will not only help us feel comfortable when we start using social media, but they'll be there for us on many occasions, such as when we post a blog post, a tweet, whatever it is we're sharing. I shared notice about this Power Chat today with my friends and followers on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter in the last couple days, and friends were generous enough then to share that with those that are following them. So friends come in very handy, not just because you want to use them for something, but just because they are just that. They're friends, and they are very supportive. And that's I think that's a big part of our business lives as well as our personal lives. We also want to think about attorneys. And obviously, you're going to want to connect to and network with other attorneys. Whether they're in your practice area or not, they can be valuable sources of education, additional perspective on a topic, direction, recent developments, and possibly even referrals. Well, they might also be your competitors, so it never hurts to watch their activity in social media. And it's really no different than it has been in traditional marketing. Lawyers and firms have observed how competitors have marketed for decades. It's just good business. And then potential clients. This one might be the most obvious to you, whereas it's often difficult to make a face-to-face connection with the targeted clients we discussed in the marketing plan slide, the previous one. It can be easier in social media. For example, let's say I want, and I'm just going to purely make this up, let's say I want to meet the head of marketing at Procter & Gamble, but I can't seem to find a connection to help make that introduction. Well, I can search on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook for people using those sites who work at Procter & Gamble. And on LinkedIn, for example, and you can do the same thing, if I search for Procter & Gamble and I find names and I don't know that person directly, LinkedIn will actually show me if any of my contacts are connected with that person. Then I can go to my connection that I've already made on LinkedIn to say, is there any chance that you would introduce me to Chelsea Lambert at Procter & Gamble? I see that she is one of your connections on LinkedIn, and I'd love to meet her. Are you comfortable introducing us? And that's okay. In fact, that's actually expected, and I get that regularly from people. On Twitter, to give you a different example, you can conduct a similar search and find those people and those conversations. So it's a little different. Those conversations that are somehow connected to Procter & Gamble, then follow them, and you don't have to ask their permission on Twitter. So it's much easier to follow those people whom you're interested in. Then tactfully, watch their conversations for a while. Then when the time feels right, go ahead and say hello, make a comment on something they said, or make some other comment that makes sense based on what you've observed. And then in the category of others, and this really depends on you, it could be influencers in your particular area, people who have the ear or the eye, in this case, if it's being read, of others who are important in your practice area. And these might be bloggers, media, entrepreneurs, thought leaders. You probably have other ideas of people who you would consider influencers in your practice area. And it's okay to follow them just the same way that I suggested above, to learn from them and to eventually, after being very patient, make a connection with them. Again, you would do this in person, so why not take advantage of the tools that we've been given to help the process along? Pam, anything before I go on to the next slide, which is about which sites to use?
Yeah. Thanks, Nancy. Yeah, just a few things. Going back to the potential clients, Nancy, you're right. Of course, this is probably the area that maybe richest with considerations, and certainly is an area that lawyers are the most interested in here to some degree, because this can be an extension. Social media can be a very effective and appropriate extension of a lawyer's advertising and marketing program. So with regard to the communications that lawyers make to potential clients, of course, our attention goes immediately to, the solicitation rules. In the ABA model rules, of course, that's Rule 7.3. But all lawyers, in your local jurisdictions, you will have your own state rule that addresses these things. So as with all things here, as we're talking about building, perhaps your marketing campaign, certainly your social media campaign, keep your local rules handy. Do consult them to see what your particular rules are in your jurisdiction. There is a bit of a range among the states as far as what obligations are placed on attorneys under their state-specific rules with regard to things like advertising, referrals, and solicitation. So those are really the three main issues I see that are coming into play here with what we're talking about right now. So, you will, with social media, begin hopefully with the education part. You're going to put information out there. You're going to be getting information from others that you're following. And Nancy's absolutely right. There will be points then at which you are going to step into perhaps more of a sales type of a role. Under the rules of professional conduct, if you're making communications about your services as a lawyer, and you're doing that, that content that you're putting out there is actually content that seeks business, that is beckoning business to you, then I think the argument can very well be made that communication, because of its content, would be something that would be regulated by the rules of professional conduct. So when you're into those kinds of communications, just bear your local rules in mind. And first and foremost with those communications, of course, is that they must be truthful and not misleading. So that runs through, what you're doing out there on social media. It just goes back to, being a good participant, I think, in social media. But it also then will ensure your compliance with your rules of professional.
Pam, I think you dropped off at the end. I don't know, Chelsea, are you there, Chelsea? I'm not sure if you can hear me, because I can't hear Chelsea or Pam. Chelsea or Pam, are you there? Are you guys there?
We are here, Nancy. We are here.
Okay. Could you hear me the whole time and I just couldn't hear you?
Yes.
Okay.
You can hear us? Okay.
I thought I had dropped off.
Okay. Let's pick up where we left off, Pam. That was.
I was just saying that I was just wrapping up on the truthful and not misleading. That's the first point, obviously, to keep in mind here. And then with regard to solicitation, again, you're going to have a state-specific rule, in your jurisdiction that governs, where the lines are with regard to that. So that and bear those rules in mind when you are online and speaking. There's nothing unique about the internet, about the social media sites and tools that alters what are your basic responsibilities under the rules. So if you can't do it in person, you also can't do it online, and it just may take some awareness on a lawyer's part to really pause for a moment and think about how how the activity online relates to the rules, because we are still used to, I think, to a large degree, thinking of the rules and their guidance more in terms of the traditional pre-internet type of activities, because they really were written to address that. So while we wait for the rules to catch up with technology, it does require that we as lawyers really put some thought into honoring the spirit of those rules and applying the rules accurately to our activities online. And many of you, if not all of you out there as lawyers, probably have access to an ethics hotline at your disciplinary office or your state bar association, and they too could perhaps give you some guidance and advice, if you feel like you're a little bit out of your element on that. And then, so lastly, with regard to advertising, if the content of your communication regarding your services, regarding yourself, is seeking business for your firm or for your practice. You also need to consider the rules that govern advertising. And oftentimes in many states that requires that there be particular labeling of those communications and particular disclosures that need to be made. And again, consult your local rules, but in many states it requires that, say for example, your website, may need to have some sort of a statement on it that says that this is an attorney advertisement. The same thing as if you were to send out letters to potential clients, you may need to put that on the outside of an envelope. Well, now in the digital world, we need to put those on our digital communications. And the challenge of that, of course, is with forums such as Twitter, where the space limitations simply make that impossible. So it's an area right now that that I think is quite challenging. But do try to keep the rules of your jurisdiction in mind, and as well as there are some states that require filing and also have screening done by the local bar associations regarding advertisements. So there may be things that you do in the areas of, say, blogging or other online types of networking activities and social media activities that could be considered to be advertising because of the nature of the content, and therefore be subject to those requirements at your state bar or disciplinary agency. So, I know I keep saying this, but do look to your local rules and see where the lines are for you with regard to these communications, just to make sure that you don't go outside of them.
Great. Thank you, Pam. And on the next slide, let's talk a little bit about what sites should be used. So there's a lot out there: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Martindale-Hubbell has a new online community. Nancy, which are your favorites, or do you lean more towards for attorneys to use?
Well, I would say, and actually one of the things I would do before you start to use any of these sites, because it's going to be, we talked about this a moment ago, but to be able to measure activity, or certainly to get an idea if you're making an impact or where your name is being mentioned on the Internet, I would actually go into Google Alerts and set up alerts, just google.com/search, and put in search terms that you want to monitor so that you know when you're being discussed by name, by firm name, by practice area. Go ahead and set these up so that you get alerts, preferably on a daily basis, so that you know when your name pops up. And that could be of competitors, practice group terms, even client names, firm names, any misspellings of your name or firm name that are common, and then again, any other keyword. But after you've done that, absolutely LinkedIn is one of my favorites. It's often called the strongest business site, Chelsea, because it has a more serious tone to it, and it allows for posting of one's resume or their bio. And because we can join special interest or practice groups that pertain to our practices and interests, it's seen as very valuable. LinkedIn has, just to give you an idea, currently has 75 million members from over 200 countries. And they also post that they're executives from every Fortune 500 company on LinkedIn. According to my friend Adrienne Lurston of JD Supra, there are 800,000 members of LinkedIn that actually have the name law or lawyer in their profile. And then a recent study by Hubbard One, again, just to give you an idea of the power of LinkedIn for attorneys. Hubbard One estimates that 3% of LinkedIn users are lawyers. And even though those two numbers end up being very different, it doesn't matter. I think what's being discovered is that these numbers are very significant, and that number symbolizes a lot of networking and referring and support and education and possibly even partnering. So yes, very much a business site, and I would recommend that every attorney and every legal professional, quite frankly, anyone in the workforce, establish a LinkedIn profile of their own. And even though there is a paid version of LinkedIn, at this point, I think I would suggest that you just use the free version, and it has enough tools and it is rich enough in its use that I think that's all you need for now. And don't forget, join the groups that have something to do with your area of interest, because that's where the networking occurs. And it's often surprising then, once you become friends with those people, how all of a sudden you connect with them in the other social networking spaces like Twitter and Facebook, which is, again, great at furthering networking and relationship building. Now, Martindale-Hubbell Connected, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with that or not, but it's a networking site for legal professionals only. And it has the ability for you to connect with friends and colleagues. You can participate in discussions on forums, share your articles and blog posts within the network. And it's recently undergone a redesign, and it really caters to solos and small law firms because it offers public groups and blogs without actually having to register. So that means that even more people will become attracted to it, which is good exposure for you. So go ahead and post your blog posts and join groups because it will allow you to build your brand and showcase your expertise, and also use it as a learning tool for professional development. And then Twitter is often referred to as a microblogging service because users are allowed to post 140-character messages that people who choose to follow us can read. And within those 140 characters, we can update our status and pretty much let the entire world, or anybody who is following us or who searches for us, know what we're up to or what we care about, ask us our opinion about what they might want to know, and just about any other kind of information you can think of. On Twitter, and I just mentioned this, unlike on LinkedIn and Facebook, you're allowed to follow anyone you'd like. They don't have to give you permission, but they can definitely, and this is a caution, they can definitely take it away if they find reason. Very easy on Twitter to block and report spam on Twitter. So users have to be careful not to send mass marketing messages and links as their sole source of Twitter conversation. Does it mean it doesn't happen? Absolutely not. It's actually quite rampant, and I've blocked and reported users regularly because of that. Just to give you an idea of the power of Twitter and why you might want to spend some time there, they have 105, as of spring, 105 million, almost 106 million registered users, and they have 300,000 new users signing up each day. Approximately 60% of those are from outside of the U.S., so it has a sizable international presence as well. And about 180 million unique visitors each month. And this next part is important to note because historically we've conducted searches on the Internet for attorneys or subject areas on Google or whatever our browser of our choice had been. But in the spring, there were over 600 million search queries on Twitter every day, meaning that people who were going to traditional sites are probably searching now in these social spaces for information on people and topics. Just to give you an idea on Twitter of 5 steps you might want to think about, Scott Stratton, who is a social media consultant, or as people on Twitter know him, his Twitter name is Unmarketing. He likes to say that there are 5 steps of Twitter success, and I agree with these. The first is to follow, which means obviously explanatory, self-explanatory. Follow people, find people you want to follow, then reply to them at a certain point, and then begin to retweet or share their information to your followers. Who wouldn't like that? You and I would love that if people retweeted our information to their followers. And then share information. Share information. And then the 5th step, Scott's 5th step, is to repeat the process and don't ever stop it. So Twitter is, yes, it's a good tool. The other thing I want to remind you about, you may have heard of these, you may have attended some, is that with Twitter, there are local events called tweet-ups, which is basically a meetup or a person-to-person networking event for people who are on Twitter in a particular area. Anybody could start it. I could jump on Twitter today and say, we're having a tweet-up next Thursday night at Scotty's Brew House, or at Brew House on Twitter, it's his name. And it's at 6 o'clock, everybody come. And then for the next week, anybody who's interested in Indianapolis would promote that. The idea there is simply to network and further relationships with people you've met online. So this can be a good way for you to network. You can actually, as attorneys, go ahead and start one in your area. And host it either at your place or at a partner. If there's some company you partner with, it may have a bigger space, you can host it there. You might want to make sure it's somewhere, though, where you can eat and drink, because that makes people feel comfortable, and it's an easy environment within which to network. But I would definitely, if that fits you, take advantage of tweet-ups. And then Facebook, there are really 2 ways we can use Facebook, and one is with a personal profile, which is what most people are accustomed to, and that's how we jump on to Facebook. And we set up this personal profile, and we can decide whether or not we want to keep that personal or we want to add business to it. And I see both. Some people are adamant that they don't like to see business mixed in with it. Some people are adamant that they think business is okay. So again, watch for a while, see what people are doing, and find out what you're comfortable with. The other option is to set up what used to be called a fan page on Facebook, which many now call a business page, and Facebook actually calls a page. And it's the more business side of Facebook. And this is where you can, it's almost like a blog in a way, but yet it's different because there is much more rapid conversation that can take place. You can share ideas, blog posts, tips of the day. I post Myrland Marketing Moments, which are short messages. And you can create something just like that that happens to pertain to your practices without actually practicing law, but just tips or things to be aware of. So think of different uses and ways that you could put information on your page. But once you have a profile, personal profile on Facebook, you can then start this page, this business page, if you will. And then let people know about it. Invite people that you think would be interested in following your business page. Let them know about it and send them a link to it. Put all of these links in your auto signature in your emails. Put it on your, definitely right up front on your website. Let people know about it. All of mine are on my business card, which probably doesn't surprise you. And then go over to Twitter and say, you know what, I'd love to have you as a friend on my Facebook page. Here's the link. So don't be afraid. If you're actually taking your valuable time, and time is at a premium in the legal profession, so if you are taking your valuable time to actually set up a presence in these spaces, then don't be afraid to let people know about it. If you are, then I would say don't do it, because then you're really building spaces that no one will find. And then we talk about blogs. And one of the best things about blogs is that many perceive them as a home base. We can write a bit longer in a blog setting than we can in the others that I've mentioned. And it's almost as if it's your home or it's your office, and you're inviting people there to have a conversation with you about some perspective you have on some topic. And they can leave comments, obviously. Don't be, my word of caution to you is to not be terribly disappointed when you don't get a lot of comments on your blog. People are commenting, and commenting is really being distributed widely across social media. I might write a blog post. Yesterday's was called "Sales is Not a Dirty Word." And I didn't necessarily receive all of my comments about it on my blog. I had a lot of people comment on Twitter, and a lot of people comment to me on Facebook. So again, yes, monitoring comments is a great way to determine how you're doing, but make sure you're taking into consideration all of the comments you're getting in all of those spaces, because they are important. And so I would say, Chelsea, I think those are probably the main ones that we need to pay attention to. After you master these, but I would give yourself a break and not try to tackle too much at once. But we can, after you're familiar with them, you can talk more about, and depending on what you're comfortable with, quite frankly, incorporating video and audio and webinars like this and other forms of media that are very social, podcasts. But I would say it's easy to be intimidated in the earlier days of using social media and social networking because there's so much to learn. So I would say tackle one, tackle two, become familiar with them, and don't let yourself get intimidated or become overwhelmed, because it can easily get that way. Pam, anything about the sites before I move on?
Yeah, just a couple of short things. On Twitter, one thing that I really like, I'm a fan of TweetDeck. It really helps me to manage the information, and along the lines of what Nancy was talking about with regard to using it to find information, and the increasing amount of people that are using Twitter to search for specific information and find out who's talking about it right now. I found particularly powerful. On TweetDeck, which, just go to tweetdeck.com, you can download it. You can keep a column running on your screen that will update you every time someone talks about whatever the phrase is or the term that you put in. It has helped me to locate people who are really dealing with similar types of practice issues right now, currently, and perhaps leaders in the field who are on an ongoing basis putting out commentary on a particular topic. So I personally am a big fan of TweetDeck and Leave It Open and have several search columns relating to different parts of what I do on a daily basis as an attorney, and I find it immensely useful.
That's a great point, Pam. I also use Hootsuite as another tool to help filter all of that content. There is a tremendous amount out there, so having tools that help you manage what's going on and what's most important to you is very helpful.
Right, right. Thanks, Chelsea. And just real quickly on blogging, I think blogging raises an interesting perspective here on when are the rules of professional conduct triggered for our online communications. And when we look at blogging, that is usually a lawyer putting out information regarding various practice areas, developments in the law, developments in his or her practice. Information is going out from that lawyer to the world. And while, a part of the motivation of blogging may be ultimately some form of client development, that maybe I will get some clients because I am this active voice in putting information out there. I believe that the argument can well be made that if that is what is happening, that is not advertising. That is not, specific commercial speech that's really dedicated to looking for clients. I have heard before, and I like the analogy of, a lawyer joining a board of an organization, a school board, something like that. That it may get them out there publicly, it may get them more exposure, and while a part of the motivation of doing that may be to enhance their professional stature and their client base, it is not the only reason for it, and therefore that type of activity, of course, we wouldn't say is subject to the rules of professional conduct. So again, there are, a blog can be dedicated specifically to getting clients and therefore be considered advertising by your local regulators, or if it is more traditionally putting information out there in a general fashion, I believe the argument can be made that it would not be subject to the rules of professional conduct. But again, consult your local rules and get advice as you need it.
Great. And now, what type of content should be used in each of these venues? Does it differ in between them, or can you use versions of the same content on different sites? Nancy, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. It really depends, again, on you and your personality and what you like to talk about and what you observe as being acceptable in those spaces. And I would say, as far as business content, absolutely part of the reason we're in these spaces is to talk about our business, learn about our business, become better at doing business. And so absolutely to engage in business conversations is appropriate in each of these spaces. And people love to talk about their business and what they do. So I don't think there's a medium that I would say don't talk about business. Personal is a little bit different. And again, that's completely your choice. There's no right or wrong here. But as I mentioned earlier, I think it's good to interject a bit of personal commentary or something that's going on in your life. You would be amazed. And Nikki Black is an example of this. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her, but I follow her on Twitter, and I think we're friends on Facebook too, but her name on Twitter is @Nikki Black, N-I-K-I-B-L-A-C-K. She's a brilliant lawyer and entrepreneur, and she and Carolyn Elephant have just written the book, Social Media for Lawyers, The Next Frontier. Well, Nikki is a great example of what I'm talking about with interjecting personal. She's a real foodie, and she loves to cook, and she is such a regular cook that I will never, ever know how to be. And she jumps on sometime in the afternoon, and she will talk about what she's making for dinner. Now, you might think, oh, my gosh, how boring, or that is so silly, or why would anyone want to know what you're making for dinner? You would be surprised, and she tells stories about this, how many people who then can relate to her on that level talk to her, and they all of a sudden they have common ground. So she establishes connections with people because of that. And so it's okay, and actually she she has a regular program that she does, video, and she teaches us about something. She's very knowledgeable on cloud computing, and she actually tried video in her kitchen a couple weeks ago. She may have done it again since, and we actually watched while she prepared something, which, gosh, kudos go out to her, because that's a tough format. That's a lot to tackle all at once, but she did it beautifully. So again, I think it's okay to interject personal. You'll find you might do it more as time goes on, as you're more comfortable seeing it happen around you. Crowdsourcing is great in social media. I have on occasion asked a question in all of my spaces and wanted to know everybody's opinion. What do you think about this or that? And if somebody has an interest in that area or has an opinion, it is amazing how free people are with their information. So use it for that. Follow-ups. When you meet someone face-to-face, go ahead, when you get back to the office, look for them in social media. A neat tool, if you have someone in your address book that I use, and you can tell what social media spaces they're in, is called Xobni. It's xobni.com. And it attaches to Outlook. And when I'm in my address book in Outlook and I actually hover over or click on someone's email without opening it, Xobni then tells me, it gives me links to look at, and it tells me whether or not they're on LinkedIn, and I can actually invite them to connect right there from the Xobni interface in Outlook. It tells me if they're on Twitter, because I already have their email address. Xobni knows, because they also see that email address out there in social media. So that's a neat tool to be able to connect with people. But when you're connecting, whether it's because of Xobni, you found them in Xobni or wherever else, let them know and remind them. Say, I met you today at TechPoint, and I just wanted to connect with you here on LinkedIn. You know, Nancy, we're looking forward to seeing you next month, or whatever it might be on Twitter or Facebook. Let them know why you want to connect and remind them how you met them, because people have so much going on every day they don't always remember. And then education. It's, you know, again, if you have something you think you can actually teach someone or some people, it may be about a subject you're observing or not, go ahead and try to be helpful and try to help people understand, again, without being client-specific or case-specific or even remotely connected to anything that you're working on, so that opposing counsel would never be able to figure out why you're actually informing people about that. Pam, anything else on that?
No, I think we'll move on to retweeting.
Okay, let's look at retweeting. Is it a good idea? It is a great idea. Again, sharing other people's information with your followers is one of the highest forms of praise and compliment and support that you can give others and this is a Twitter term, retweeting. And again, it just means when someone sends out a message, which is called a tweet, when you then share it, that's called retweeting. It's known as RT in Twitter language, and it's great for relationship building. You don't always do it just to build relationships. If I think something is valuable knowledge to my followers, then I will retweet messages that I think are educational to them. It's good for sharing and conversation. It often sparks commentary. It's good. It shows what your areas of interest are without you blatantly telling people what your practice area is, and demonstrates your areas of expertise. If I retweet a lot of information about marketing and specifically social media, people are going to get a pretty quick idea that those might be my areas of emphasis. So without my having to say so, retweeting actually helps me send that message. And an added benefit, certainly not the main priority, is that it encourages reciprocity. And in this case, that means that if someone retweets my messages a lot to their followers, well, then I think that's extremely kind. They don't have to do that. And then I am more conscious of retweeting their information when I think it applies to my followers. So yes, I think retweeting is a great idea. And then the last, one of the last points that we have, and I know we're running short of time, Chelsea, is how to get people to engage. And again, Pam, if you please jump in on me, because I'm just trying to finish these slides, but how to get people to engage, go ahead and tell them about news or recent developments. And Let them know what's going on in your particular area of interest. Ask people questions. If I saw, for example, Scott Stratton or @onmarketing on Twitter say something and I didn't understand it, or I wanted to learn more about his perspective, which often occurs because we only get 140 characters to type, then I might say, Scott, help me understand why you think that. Well, Scott, probably, if he has time, will be happy to explain his perspective a little more. So that's engagement. Another is to give people feedback. When you observe someone, or you've read their blog post, or whatever it might be, you saw them speak, you heard them speak, it's good, just as in real live networking, it's okay to give them, and it's a good idea to give them feedback. And then again, you engage people when you share content, both theirs and the content you see from others. It's a great way to start a conversation. Again, much like if you were in person with someone at an event and another friend walked up, then one of your first roles as a connector, which is usually admired, is to say, gosh, Jim, have you met John? I think the two of you might be interested in knowing one another because, Jim, you run this, and actually John has spent time there for 10 years at his previous job. Again, you can't always make that connection, but it's nice to connect people. And Chelsea, you want to go on?
Nancy,
Oh,
can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I would just add that a very simple way to start on Twitter for people that are just getting used to it is to simply begin by posting and sharing things that you find interesting professionally, personally or whatnot. But if we're doing this for professional reasons, put out the things that you found useful as you come across them, and they may be things from newspapers, things from bar journals, from various resources. And what you'll find then is that you will attract the people that have those same interests as well, and then the whole process just sort of takes off on its own. So it's a nice starting point.
It does, and before you know it, Pam's right, before you know it, all of a sudden you have built a number of followers simply because you've found one another and you gravitate toward one another because of the information that you have been sharing. So you're exactly right. And then Chelsea, I think the last one we had is how much time should we invest, and it really, again, depends on the individual. It takes more time in the early days because we have to go in and set up all these profiles, but don't think you have to do them all in one day, unless, of course, you said, gosh, Monday's going to be my day to set up all my profiles in social media. Then go ahead and do that. If you are a person that needs the discipline of a schedule and you work positively with a very strict schedule, then make yourself a grid and put the tools you want to use, LinkedIn, Facebook, Martindale Hubble, Twitter, your blog, whatever. Put those down one side and put your schedule across the top, and then mark in 10 to 20-minute increments when you're going to actually jump on those spaces and do something. I don't happen to be a person that responds well to that kind of scheduling, and I will, because of so much going on that changes by the hour on certain days for meetings, I'm much better at just jumping on and off in between phone calls, in between while I'm waiting for a page to load somewhere else. I can look at them on my phone, so I tend to be a little bit looser with my schedule, but that's just me. Again, these tools are really very different based on the user, and again, no one's right, no one's wrong. It just depends on what you find is the most efficient way for you to use them. Be consistent about it, though. Don't set up a Twitter account. I looked the other day through a tool to see who I was following that hadn't tweeted in the last, yes, it was Twitter, who hadn't tweeted in the last 60 days, and there were lots and lots of people. Now, I know people have gotten busy and some abandoned their social media accounts because of that, or lack of interest, or they didn't see any, they didn't experience what I'm talking about today. But be consistent with it and be regular in your schedule, because that's when you begin to develop these relationships and people will be happy to see you. It's a great feeling to actually make these connections and have these conversations, both professional and personal, with people. And my last recommendation is to be very patient. That doesn't mean go on with it for 5 years if you're not seeing any results. Again, results depending on what goals you set at the beginning, but it takes a while to establish relationships. Just like with face-to-face networking, you don't meet somebody, and well, it happens, but it's pretty rare when you meet someone and within 10 minutes they say, oh my gosh, let's go, I want to do business with you, let's go to your office right now, I have a matter I need you to help with. It takes nurturing, and it takes them getting to know you and you getting to know them and figuring out whether or not you really are the right one to help them. So very much the same as with face-to-face. Give virtual networking a chance and be patient with it. And be patient with yourself. There are days when I hop on and I'll say something and I'll get no response at all. And if I was fragile enough, I would think, wow, what's wrong? But I'm not, and I understand that relationships take time. So I just wait. A couple hours later when I'm on again, all of a sudden it's different because a lot of my followers are present. So that would be my last recommendation, is that be very patient with it. If you're feeling, tweet me or add me as a friend on Facebook, and I'll talk to you if you're ever feeling that way. So that would be my last recommendation, Chelsea.
Great. And Pam, do you have anything on the tips that you use yourself regarding how much time should be invested in these activities during the day?
I probably, like Nancy, I fit it in where it's convenient with my schedule, and I do it as often as I can. And I too go through lapses where I'm very busy and probably don't tweet for a period of several days. But I agree with what you're saying, that it's just important to be patient with it. And and a great starting point. I mean, I'm fortunate to work here at a company where a lot of people obviously are very active in social media, and I'm very exposed to it. But where I started on Twitter, which for me was probably the biggest transition. It's just it's a harder animal to kind of get your hands around. And and I started with the CEO and our president, and they're just very active in this. And you'll find if you just follow one or two people the first day. So if you follow Nancy and me and a couple of other people, and you'll see through their followers and comments that come up. If you go into their stream and you'll see things that come up, you'll immediately begin finding other people that have shared interests. So it's very simple to just start very small, and your use of it and comfort level with it will just naturally come. So just give it time, and and if you just sit back and listen to the conversation on Twitter and other social media sites for a while until you're comfortable with it, a time will come where you feel moved to jump in and converse yourself. So just give it time.
Grow into it. And that actually finishes up our session for today. We're going to go into a couple of questions, specifically, what type of content should I not share? What are some potential road hazards that could be in the way that we should try to avoid as we dive in and get used to using social media?
Well, I would say the obvious ones are client information and anything about a case. And I know this sounds obvious, but I've read instances of impact on court cases because an attorney slipped and made a comment in a social networking space that actually was able to be tracked back to a case. So anything that has to do with a client, or that you're on the phone with a particular person, or you just got done talking to someone about, even if you're vague and say, I talked to someone about blah, 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 it's so tempting to have those conversations, but don't. Anything that could be traced by that client or opposing counsel or anyone can really get you into trouble. So I would just be extra cautious about that. I would also, and we haven't talked about this, this tool, but be careful with the location-based services like Foursquare and the one that Facebook just launched the other day. And on Foursquare, you check in at particular addresses. It's part game, part strategy, part marketing. And you check in at different locations. Well, just be very cautious if you are using these, or if any of your colleagues are, about checking in any places that have anything to do with a client. Say you have a restaurant that's a client, don't even check in at that restaurant. Just don't even let people know or have the intelligence or the competitive intelligence that you have anything to do with that client. That client deserves that confidentiality, so be ultra sensitive to not releasing information that might give someone some information about what you're working on. And negative, I'd say negative comments. On occasion, and that's, I know that's pretty subjective. What is a negative comment? Is it that I'm frustrated with, United Airlines, or I'm not, but you name it, the business, because I missed a flight, or they didn't get my luggage to its desired location or whatever it might be, then that's pretty normal, and we see a lot of that. But I would say incessant negative commentary gets very boring to people who are following you, unless they're like that too, and then misery loves company. So again, it's your decision, but I would, if you are a negative commenter, I would make sure you mix that with a healthy dose of what it is that's not so negative going on, because that's how you will be pigeonholed as someone who's very negative. If that's okay with you and that's your brand, then so be it, but I'm guessing it's probably not in most cases. And then this one is I think there's sensitivity here. I would not share too much about staff and employees. And I know that sounds odd, but let me explain. Say someone in your office who is not necessarily doing a great job, or for your client, for example, and you know you need to work with them on a certain skill set. Well, but they happen to have a great day, or they did a great job coordinating an event or a seminar, and you post on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever, your blog maybe, about this event and say, Nancy did a great job today. She is the best organizer we've ever had. Well, lo and behold, 2 months later, Nancy messes up again on the job, and she's now in disciplinary action or probation, and she's probably, my job's probably on the bubble. Well, Nancy can then go back later on after she's been fired and say, but look at this. In a very public space, you complimented me and said I was the best organizer you had ever seen. So my caution there is don't post information, although I love to see people compliment others when it's warranted. It's a good boost. Just be very cautious about doing that when it can come, when there's a situation where it can come back to hurt you later on, if there's any sort of situation like that going on. And Pam, you might have a lot of other thoughts about what not to share.
Yeah, I agree completely on the confidentiality. I mean, as lawyers, carry that natural concern and attention that we all have to client confidentiality onto the internet, and just always keep that foremost in your mind, because anything that gives away any sort of information about your client's confidential matter, obviously should not be shared in a public forum like that. And have impulse control, of course, with regard to expressing frustration, particularly as it would relate to, say, clients, judges, opposing counsel. We've all heard some stories about that, there have been people that in the early days of Twitter did walk out of court and pretty explicitly express some frustration at the judge. And you don't want to be making comments online again that you would not make in person, and certainly not to that person's face. It's probably just a good rule. If that person could hear you making that statement and you wouldn't make that statement, you probably ought not to be doing it online as well. It's usually a good rule of thumb. So good judgment here on all things is probably the best course.
Great. Well, thank you so much to you both for your time today and sharing your experience and personal tips with all of us. We are going to have a follow-up email that all of our attendees will receive after today's session, and thank you to all of you who joined us today. If you do have questions after the session that you would like to have answered by Nancy or Pam, you can email those to powerchat@TotalAttorneys, or feel free to follow and reach out to them on Twitter. Nancy is at Nancy Myrland, and Pam is at Gracyalny. Thank you again to everyone, and we hope to talk to you soon on the next Total Attorneys Power Chat.
Thanks, Chelsea and Pam. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Have a great day.